On Christmas Eve, Isabel stood in front of the grand mirror, her fingers brushing the fabric of the red dress she had carefully chosen for tonight. It wasn't just a dress, it was a statement. Her reflection shimmered under the chandelier's light, and for a moment, she felt like a queen in her own kingdom. She had everything she ever wanted: her perfect family, her successful husband, and a life others would envy. Or so she thought. As she adjusted the necklace Ryan had given her for their anniversary, her mind couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something wasn't right. Tonight was supposed to be the perfect celebration of their love, but it felt like the calm before a storm. Ryan had been distant lately, his usual warmth replaced by cold, calculated politeness. Isabel had been too busy with work and the holiday preparations to confront the changes in their relationship. She had hoped, prayed even, that her instincts were wrong. But deep down, she knew something was amiss. Ryan had stopped coming home on time. His eyes no longer sparkled when he looked at her. And then, she found the first clue: a forgotten phone with a message that wasn't meant for her eyes. The realization hit her hard, but she refused to let it break her. Not tonight. Not on Christmas Eve. Isabel took a deep breath and smoothed the dress once more. She had never been the type to cry, to give in to weakness. Ryan thought she'd crumble. He thought she'd break down when the divorce papers came. But tonight, she would show him just how wrong he was. As the doorbell rang, she grabbed her purse and walked downstairs. The house was filled with the warmth of the season, but Isabel felt the chill of the truth creeping in. Ryan was sitting in the living room, his back turned to her as he stared out the window. He didn't even look up as she entered. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice void of emotion. She nodded, her lips curling into a small smile. "I'm ready." The evening went on in a blur of empty words and forced smiles. Isabel could see the way Ryan's eyes flickered toward the door, waiting for the moment he could hand her the papers. He thought she was oblivious. He thought she didn't know. But Isabel wasn't foolish. She had seen the way. He looked at her with indifference, the way his touch had turned cold. She could feel the distance growing between them, but she wasn't going to let him win. Not like this. At the end of the evening, just as Ryan thought he had succeeded in breaking her, Isabel did something unexpected. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, velvet box. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the power she now held. She handed it to him. Ryan looked at her in confusion as he took the box, his fingers brushing against hers. She waited, watching his expression shift from confusion to disbelief as he opened the box. Inside was a single note. He unfolded it slowly, his eyes scanning the words written in elegant script. "You may have thought you could break me, but you've only made me stronger. Merry Christmas, Ryan." The silence in the room was deafening. Ryan's face drained of color as he realized what he had done. The divorce papers were no longer the most shocking thing in the room. Isabel had given him the gift of her strength, the gift he could never take away. For the first time in years, Ryan felt the weight of his actions. He had underestimated her. Isabel stood there, her posture unwavering, as Ryan's world crumbled around him. This Christmas, she wasn't the one who would cry. As the days passed, Isabel focused on rebuilding her life with quiet determination. The divorce papers were signed, but she was not a woman who lived in the past. The house felt emptier now, the echo of Ryan's absence louder in every corner. But Isabel had a plan. She spent her days at work, her nights at the gym, and the moments in between rediscovering who she was beyond the title of wife. She didn't need his approval, didn't need his money. Isabel had her own dreams, and she would make them a reality. Every morning, she woke up to the same view, the skyline of the city she had built her life in, and every night, she went to bed knowing she was closer to her goal. Isabel had started a new business venture, one that she had dreamed of long before Ryan had stepped into her life. The idea had been tucked away in the back of her mind, overshadowed by their relationship and the world he had created for them. But now it was her time. As she stood in the office building, her high heels clicking on the marble floor, Isabel felt a sense of pride. She had worked for this. She had earned this. She could feel the weight of Ryan's departure lifting off her shoulders, replaced by a sense of liberation. No more hiding behind his success. No more dimming her own light. She was ready to shine. A week later, Isabel was attending a charity gala, something she had been invited to months ago. The event was buzzing with energy, and Isabel, in a sleek black dress that hugged her curves and shimmered under the lights, felt like the center of the room. She had worked hard to get here, and tonight, she was going to prove that she was not just the woman who had been left behind. She was the woman who had risen from the ashes. As she stepped into the gala, she immediately caught sight of Ryan across the room. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the briefest moment, there was a flicker of recognition. He hadn't expected to see her here, not like this. Confident, beautiful, and standing tall in the crowd of the elite. Isabel smiled to herself. She knew this moment was coming. She had known that he would show up, that he would see her once again. But this time, things would be different. The last time Ryan had seen her, she had been broken. But now, Isabel was whole again, and she was ready to show him what he had lost. As she walked toward the bar, Isabel noticed the way people looked at her, some with admiration, others with curiosity. She had become a symbol of success, of resilience. She wasn't just the woman who had been abandoned. She was the woman who had turned pain into power. Ryan was watching her now, his gaze heavy with regret. But Isabel didn't flinch. She didn't need his approval anymore. She had everything she needed within herself. The evening wore on, and Ryan couldn't take his eyes off of her. He had thought that Isabel would crumble, that she would beg him to come back. But she didn't. She had built her own empire, and in the process, she had built herself. As the night came to an end, Isabel knew that Ryan's regrets were his to carry. She had given him a gift, one he would never forget. But that gift wasn't forgiveness. It was the knowledge that he had lost something far more valuable than anything money could buy. Isabel had regained her power, and that was all she ever needed. Isabel's life had shifted in ways she had never expected. The early mornings spent at the office were now filled with purpose, and the late nights were dedicated to crafting a future she had once only dreamed of. The sting of betrayal was no longer a burden, but a catalyst for her transformation. It was just a few months ago that she had walked away from a life of luxury, from Ryan and all the promises he had broken. Now, as she sat in her penthouse, looking out over the skyline of the city that had always felt like home, she realized just how far she had come. Her business was thriving, and with each passing day, she felt more confident in her ability to navigate this new world on her own. But there was still one thing that remained unsettled. As successful as she had become, Isabel hadn't yet figured out how to fully close the door on her past with Ryan. It wasn't about forgiveness, at least not yet. It was about proving to herself that she could rise above it all. She had spent too long in the shadows of his expectations, in the confines of a marriage that had once seemed perfect. Now, she was finally free to define her own success. Isabel had no interest in returning to the life she once shared with Ryan. That version of herself was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more self-assured. She had become the woman she had always dreamed of being, the woman who would never again put her worth in someone else's hands. But even with all her progress, there were still moments when the memories of what had been haunted her. Ryan's face, the way he had once smiled at her, the life they had built together, it all felt like a distant dream now. She had imagined a future with him, a future they had talked about for years. But now, that future was nothing more than a series of empty promises. Isabel took a deep breath and stood up from her desk. It was time to face the one thing she had been avoiding, Ryan. She had seen him at the gala, and she knew he was still watching her, still holding on to the past. But that night, in her red dress, Isabel had sent him a message, without saying a word. She was no longer the woman he had left behind. She was a woman who had built her own empire, and he was the one who had lost. A few days later, she found herself at a coffee shop, sitting across from an old friend, Claire. They had known each other for years, but it had been some time since they'd spoken. Isabel had been so wrapped up in her own journey that she hadn't realized how much time had passed since they last caught up. Claire listened intently as Isabel shared the details of her new life, her business, and the challenges she had faced. It felt good to talk, to share her journey with someone who understood. As the conversation continued, Isabel felt something shift inside her. She realized that while she had been so focused on rebuilding her life, she had neglected to fully heal from the pain Ryan had caused. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about her. She needed to let go of the past, to move forward without the weight of it holding her back. Later that week, Isabel received an unexpected message from Ryan. His words were carefully chosen, almost as if he had rehearsed them. He apologized for everything, for the mistakes he had made, and for the way he had treated her. Isabel read his message but didn't respond right away. Instead, she sat in silence, contemplating her next move. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate the apology, it was just that she didn't need it. She had already forgiven herself. Ryan had been a part of her life once, but now, he was simply a memory. Isabel took a deep breath and hit send. I'm glad you found clarity, Ryan. But I've already found mine. With that, she closed her phone and turned her attention back to the life she was building, one that no longer included him. The weeks that followed Isabel's decision to fully embrace her new life were nothing short of transformative. She immersed herself in her business, taking on more responsibility, expanding her network, and building relationships with people who valued her for who she was, not the woman attached to a powerful man. It felt like breathing for the first time in years. She was no longer just someone's wife or the woman left behind. She was Isabel, a force to be reckoned with. One afternoon, while walking into her office building, Isabel received a call that she hadn't expected. The voice on the other end was calm, but there was an undeniable sense of urgency. Isabel, the voice said. It's Ryan. We need to talk. Isabel paused for a moment, her grip tightening on the phone. She had been free of him for months now, and the thought of reopening that chapter made her uneasy. But something in his voice told her this wasn't going to be the same conversation as before. What is it, Ryan? She asked, her tone steady but cautious. It's about the company, he replied. There's been an issue that requires your attention. I need your help. Isabel frowned, unsure of how to feel. Ryan had always been a man of pride, and the fact that he was reaching out to her now suggested that he was in a position of vulnerability. Isabel knew better than to immediately agree, but she couldn't deny the small spark of curiosity that flickered within her. I'm listening, she said, her voice cool but composed. Ryan explained that there was a major project at risk, one that could jeopardize the future of the company he had worked so hard to build. He was facing a problem that required expertise in a field that Isabel had become an authority in. It was clear that Ryan needed her help, but Isabel couldn't help but wonder, why now? After everything that had happened between them, after the way he had treated her, why was he turning to her for help? She took a deep breath and, after a moment of hesitation, she agreed to meet with him. There was no way she could ignore the fact that she had the knowledge and experience to help him, even if it meant crossing paths with someone who had once broken her heart. The next day, Isabel arrived at the high-rise office building where Ryan's company was headquartered. As she stepped out of the elevator and walked down the hall toward his office, she couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. This was the same place where she had once sat by his side, the same office where they had shared dreams of building a future together. But now, she was walking in on her own terms. She knocked on the door and entered when she heard his voice inviting her in. Ryan stood by the window, looking out at the city below. When he turned to face her, there was a noticeable change in his demeanor. The confident, arrogant man she had once known seemed smaller now, more human. Isabel, he said, his voice softer than usual. Thank you for coming. Isabel took a seat across from him, her posture straight and unwavering. Let's get to it, she replied. I'm here to help, but don't think for a second that this changes anything between us. Ryan nodded, acknowledging her terms. He explained the situation in detail, and Isabel listened carefully, offering her insights where she could. As they worked through the problem, she couldn't help but notice the way he watched her, the admiration and respect that had once been missing from their relationship. For the first time in a long time, Isabel realized that she no longer felt anger or resentment toward Ryan. She felt nothing at all. She had moved on, and it had nothing to do with him. This was about her, about reclaiming her power and her independence. As the meeting came to a close, Ryan looked at Isabel, his eyes full of gratitude. I don't know what I would have done without you, he said quietly. Isabel stood up and gathered her things. You'll figure it out, she said, her voice firm but devoid of malice. But remember, Ryan, you've already lost me, and that's not something you can fix. As she left the office, Isabel felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had done what needed to be done, and she had done it on her terms. Ryan's chapter in her life was finally closed, and she was free to continue writing her own story. The future was hers to create, and she was ready for whatever came next. Isabel had no idea what she would do with the sense of clarity that washed over her. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of peace. She had done what was necessary. She had helped Ryan without falling back into the trap of the past. She had shown herself, and him, that she no longer needed him to succeed. Her life was now in her hands, and it felt incredibly empowering. The next few weeks were filled with continued growth and new challenges. Isabel's business ventures were expanding, and with every new deal, she gained more confidence in herself. She was no longer the woman who had once waited for approval or validation from others. Isabel was the architect of her own destiny. As her professional life flourished, Isabel found herself in new social circles, meeting people who respected her for her intellect and strength, not for her past. She began to make new friends, those who were genuinely interested in her as a person, not the wife of a successful businessman. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Isabel attended a networking event for entrepreneurs. The room was filled with bright, ambitious people, all eager to make connections. Isabel, now confident in herself, moved through the crowd with ease. She had become comfortable in her own skin, no longer feeling like an outsider. As she mingled with the other guests, a familiar face appeared across the room. It was Ryan. He had been invited to the same event. Isabel's heart skipped a beat, but she quickly steadied herself. She wasn't the same woman who had once stood by his side. She was stronger, and she would not let his presence shake her. Ryan approached her, his eyes soft with something Isabel couldn't quite place, regret, perhaps, or longing. He smiled slightly, as if unsure of what to say. "Isabel," he said, his voice tentative. "I didn't expect to see you here." Isabel glanced at him for a moment, taking in the changes in him. He seemed tired, the weight of everything that had happened between them etched into his face. She could feel the years of their history still lingering in the air, but she also felt the distance that had grown between them. "I didn't expect to see you either," she replied calmly. "But here we are." Ryan shifted uncomfortably, his smile fading. "I just wanted to say, I've been thinking a lot about what happened. About everything." Isabel raised an eyebrow, not sure where he was going with this. "And what conclusions have you come to?" she asked, her voice steady. Ryan hesitated before speaking again. "I realized I was wrong. About everything. About us. About how I treated you." Isabel listened quietly, but she didn't feel the rush of emotions that had once overwhelmed her when he apologized. Instead, there was only a quiet understanding. "Ryan," she said softly, "you don't need to apologize to me. I've moved on. You and we're part of each other's past now." There was no bitterness in her words, no anger. She had come to terms with everything that had happened. Ryan looked at her, his eyes filled with regret. "I know, and I wish things could have been different. But I understand now. I see who you are now, Isabel. The woman you've become. It's incredible." Isabel gave him a small, almost sad smile. "Thank you. But I think we both know it's too late for us." Ryan nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I understand." The conversation drifted into silence, and Isabel knew it was time to walk away. She had nothing more to say to him, and nothing more to give. She had already found her peace. As she walked away, Isabel felt a sense of finality. There were no more loose ends, no more unresolved feelings. She had forgiven herself long ago, and now, it was time for her to move forward without looking back. She had learned to live for herself, to embrace her own journey. Ryan had been part of her story, but now, it was her turn to write the next chapter. And this time, she was the one in control. Isabel's life had become a symphony of triumphs, big and small. Each day felt like a victory, and with every success, she felt more confident in her ability to carve out her own path. She had become someone she barely recognized, but in the best way possible. The woman who had once feared being alone, who had once defined herself through her relationship with Ryan, was now someone who stood strong on her own. Her business was booming, and more importantly, she was no longer haunted by the shadows of her past. But even with all the growth and success, there was still an undercurrent of curiosity that Isabel couldn't ignore. She had moved on from Ryan, but what about the life they had built together? The memories, the shared experiences, were they truly gone forever? It had been months since their last encounter, since the day she had closed the door on their past. And yet, in quiet moments, Isabel wondered if there was more to the story. Was there unfinished business? Could she ever truly put him behind her, or was there a part of her that still wanted answers? As she stood at the window of her new office, Overlooking the sprawling city below, Isabel realized something. She didn't need closure from Ryan. She didn't need him to validate her success, to apologize for his mistakes. She had already moved forward, and that was enough. But in that moment, she knew there was one final thing she needed to do. She needed to forgive herself completely, to release any lingering doubts and fully embrace the woman she had become. And so, one evening, she found herself on a walk through the park. The air was crisp, the evening sky painted in shades of purple and orange. It was a peaceful moment, one that gave Isabel the clarity she needed. As she walked, her thoughts drifted to Ryan, but not in the way they once had. She didn't think of the man who had hurt her, but of the person she had been when they were together. She thought about the lessons she had learned, the strength she had found in herself, and how far she had come. She had been through a storm, but now, she was standing in the light. Isabel paused by a fountain, the sound of the water soothing her mind. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking in the serenity of the night. It was in this moment, standing alone, that she finally felt a sense of peace. She had done it. She had taken control of her life, built something meaningful, and found her own voice. As the wind brushed her hair back, Isabel smiled. There was no more room in her heart for anger, for regret, for the past. She had forgiven herself, and with that forgiveness came a sense of freedom she had never known. She could now move forward with no strings attached. When Isabel returned home that night, she felt lighter. She no longer carried the weight of the past. It was as if a door had closed, and with it, all the sadness and pain had evaporated. Isabel was ready for whatever the future held. She was no longer defined by her past. She had become her own person, and no one, not even Ryan, could take that from her. She had built her life on her terms, and that was something no one could ever take away. It had been a few months since Isabel had made peace with her past, and now, her life was moving at a pace she could finally control. Her business was flourishing, and with every passing day, she felt more rooted in her purpose. Yet, even amidst all her accomplishments, a small part of her was still haunted by the idea that someone, was missing. She had everything she had dreamed of: independence, success, and self-respect. But as time went on, Isabel began to realize that the void wasn't as much about what she lacked as it was about what she was now able to give. She had always been a woman who gave everything to those she loved, but somewhere along the way, she had forgotten to nurture herself. Now, she had to learn the art of receiving, not just from others but from herself as well. One quiet evening, as she sat by the fire, Isabel thought about the years that had passed, the lessons she had learned, the mistakes that had shaped her, and the strength that had grown inside her with every challenge. She remembered the day she had walked away from Ryan, not knowing where her future would lead, but knowing, deep in her heart, that it was the only choice. The woman she had become was the result of everything she had survived, and she was no longer afraid of what came next. Isabel wasn't the same woman who had once cried in the middle of a marriage that had crumbled under the weight of lies. She wasn't the woman who had clung to the idea of love, no matter how much it hurt. She had evolved. The realization was both liberating and empowering. She could still love deeply, but now she loved herself first. The sound of her phone ringing broke her thoughts, and she glanced at the screen. It was a number she didn't recognize. Hesitantly, she answered. "Isabel," the voice on the other end said. It was Ryan. Isabel paused, taking a breath. She hadn't expected to hear from him again, but there was no fear, no resentment in her heart anymore. Only curiosity. "What is it, Ryan?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, his voice low. "I know I hurt you, and I don't expect forgiveness. But I need to tell you something. Something that I should have told you a long time ago." Isabel listened intently, waiting. "I've made a mess of everything. My life, my company. I've lost everything that truly mattered." His words hung in the air for a moment before he continued. "I see now, Isabel, what I lost when I let you go. And I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry." Isabel felt a flicker of something stir within her, but it wasn't the anger or bitterness she had once felt. It was more like a distant echo. She had already forgiven him long ago, but hearing him say it out loud, hearing the sincerity in his voice, made something inside her shift. "Thank you for saying that," Isabel replied softly. "But I've moved on, Ryan. I've built a life for myself. I've found a peace that doesn't need any of this anymore." There was a long silence on the other end of the line before Ryan spoke again. I know. I know. I needed to say it. For myself, as much as for you. Isabel's heart softened as she realized that this conversation was the closure they both needed, not because of anything they would do or say, but because it was finally over. Goodbye, Ryan, she said, her voice steady, but there was no bitterness, no regret. Take care of yourself. She hung up the phone and sat in the silence that followed, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. She had no need to hold on to anything anymore. No past, no resentment. She was free. Isabel had reached a place where she no longer needed anyone's approval, not even Ryan's. She had built her own worth, her own empire, and she was finally in a place where she could just be. As she sat there, watching the fire burn out, she realized that life would continue to unfold in ways she couldn't predict. But whatever came next, she knew she was ready. She was ready to receive all the love, success, and happiness that she had earned, and nothing would ever take that away from her. Isabel stood at the balcony of her apartment, the city sprawling beneath her like an endless sea of lights. The weight of her past had finally lifted, and for the first time in a long while, she felt completely at peace. The life she had once known was now just a distant memory, a part of her history that no longer defined her. She had rebuilt everything on her own terms, and each new step she took brought her closer to the woman she had always wanted to be. Her business continued to grow, her relationships deepened, and she found herself surrounded by people who admired her not for her past, but for the strength she had shown in overcoming it. It had been a long road to get here, but Isabel had come so far. She had learned to trust herself again, to trust that she had the ability to make her own decisions, to carve out her own path. The road had been difficult at times, and there had been moments when she questioned everything, but she had never given up. Now, as she stood looking out at the city she had made her own, she realized that everything she had been through had led her here. She had become someone she was proud of. But even as Isabel relished in her newfound strength, there was something inside her, a quiet yearning, that reminded her that life wasn't meant to be lived in isolation. She had built her empire, but she hadn't built it alone. There were people who had supported her, who had helped her along the way. And though she had learned to stand on her own, Isabel realized that she wanted more than just success. She wanted love. Not the love that had been forced upon her in the past, but the kind of love that was built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding. Isabel wasn't the same woman who had once clung to a relationship for fear of being alone. She was stronger now, wiser, and more certain of her worth. She wasn't afraid to love again, but this time, she would do it on her terms. She knew that the right person would come into her life when the time was right, and until then, she would continue to focus on herself, on her growth, and on the life she was building. As Isabel turned away from the balcony, she couldn't help but smile. There was so much to look forward to. She had come so far, and the journey was just beginning. Her past no longer had a hold on her, and the future was hers to create. The world was at her feet, and she was ready for whatever came next. She had rebuilt her life from the ground up, and now, she was ready to enjoy the fruits of her labor. Isabel knew that she had learned the most important lesson of all. The greatest love was the one you gave yourself. With that knowledge, she was ready to step into the next chapter of her life, fearless and free. Isabel had come to understand that life was a series of chapters, each with its own challenges and lessons. As she sat in her office, overlooking the city she had claimed as her own, she realized that she had reached a turning point. The life she had been rebuilding was no longer just about survival. It was about thriving. She had spent so long focused on getting through the day, on putting one foot in front of the other, that she hadn't taken the time to reflect on how far she had come. The strength she had found within herself was no longer a distant hope, but a reality she could feel in every decision she made. Isabel had learned that success wasn't just about achieving external goals. It was about finding peace within. It was about recognizing that happiness didn't come from a person or a circumstance, but from within. She had walked away from her past, from a man who had broken her heart, and she had come out stronger on the other side. Isabel no longer measured her worth by someone else's standards. She had stopped looking for approval from the people who couldn't see her value, and instead, she focused on the people who saw her for who she truly was. The woman who had survived. the woman who had built something from nothing. And with each passing day, she grew even more certain of her path. But even with all her growth, Isabel couldn't deny the quiet ache that lingered deep within her. The longing for connection, for the kind of love that wasn't defined by fear or insecurity. She had learned to love herself, but now, she was ready for something more. She wanted a partner, someone who would stand by her side, not because she needed saving, but because they could share in the joy of life together. Isabel had always been independent, but now, she realized that love didn't have to be a source of weakness. It could be a source of strength. She didn't need a man to complete her, but she wanted the kind of relationship where both people were whole on their own, yet stronger together. As she sat at her desk, looking at the plans for her next business venture, Isabel smiled. She had everything she needed. She had built her life from the ground up, and now, she was ready to invite someone into it. Someone who could complement her, not complete her. That night, as she walked down the city streets, Isabel felt a sense of excitement. The future was full of possibilities, and she was ready to embrace whatever came next. She had learned to be the hero of her own story, but now, she was ready to share that story with someone else. The city was alive with energy, and Isabel felt that same energy pulsing through her veins. She had made it this far, and she knew that no matter what the future held, she was ready. She was finally at peace with herself, and now, she could face whatever came next with a heart wide open. The woman who had once feared the unknown was now the woman who welcomed it with open arms. Isabel knew that the journey wasn't over. It had only just begun.